and welcome to another edition of Your Therapist Needs Therapy, a podcast where two mental health professionals talk about their mental health journeys and how they navigate mental wellness while working in the mental health field. I'm your host, Jeremy Schumacher, licensed marriage and family therapist. This week is a solo episode in which your therapist needs therapy. The therapist is me, and I need therapy because the director of Human Health Services is Robert Kennedy Jr., professional anti-vaxxer. That is his actual profession. He gets paid a lot of money to lead the anti-vax cause and put the Kennedy name on it. He's a garbage human being and has been for a long time. We'll get into a little bit of that. And he is going to profit off of harming autistic folks. So let's dig into that for our own sanity and because we need people to speak up against this stuff. Resistance matters. Science matters. Using voices to protect marginalized communities matter. So I have been working in the mental health field for 16 years now. I am somebody who also has diagnosis of ADHD and is aware that they are also autistic. And yeah, I mean, RFK is a problem for a lot of reasons. I live in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. This year, Milwaukee has taken a concerted effort to check for lead pipes in Milwaukee public schools and get rid of any lead paint. A lot of the schools in Milwaukee have lead paint. Lead paint is toxic. It deteriorates, it chips away, it gets in the air, it gets onto stuff that people then touch with their hands and wipe their eyes and noses. Lead paint is toxic for people. Milwaukee has requested help from the CDC, and the CDC said, sorry, the entire department that's supposed to help with that isn't around anymore. They've been fired. That's because of RFK. So like RFK is causing harm, right? Like you can't in one hand say environmental factors are harming people and we're going to figure that shit out when it comes to autism and then be like, hey, but we're going to fire all the people who help schools and public institutions get rid of lead paint in their buildings, right? Like the hypocrisy is maddening, but that's never the point here. The point is attacking marginalized communities, and the point is profiteering. So let's look at what got us here. RFK is a Kennedy. Kennedy family used to be synonymous with the Democratic Party. And some version of progressive liberalism. I think there's a lot of like whitewashing of Kennedy and a lot of like of JFK and like a lot of imaginary hopes and dreams about what could have happened if he hadn't been shot. I'm a little more skeptical of that. Not that history is my main area of focus, but to think that Lyndon B. Johnson wasn't as good as JFK is not a stretch, sure. So JFK was Bobby Kennedy Jr.'s uncle. And so like the Kennedy family has had issues. When we look at where RFK Jr. comes from, I mean, it comes from a family of people dying, plane crashes, people being assassinated, people being attempted to be assassinated. The family is at once insanely wealthy off of betting on the stock market crashing, which is, I'm not making that up. I'm not even being colloquial in that. That's where the Kennedy money comes from, is shorting the stock market. So like, I don't know. Again, the idea that JFK was going to save everyone from everything, I think has like, again, just been blown out of proportion. And Bobby Kennedy was like a privileged kid who went to private schools and went to a whites only school. And like, again, the Kennedy political machine versus the reality of what they were doing behind the scenes are different things. But yeah, he had some really traumatic deaths early in his life. The parenting he did receive after his dad died was not good. Seems like a lot of people didn't really know what to do with him. and he was a Kennedy, so he just sort of got away with a lot of stuff. The weird thing with RFK Jr. is like when you look at his history, like dude definitely has ADHD. And I'm a therapist, a licensed one at that. So I will ethically add here that I am not legally allowed to diagnose people who I don't work with. So this is Jeremy the person riffing a minute here. Um, he literally would climb the walls in his school. They were brick, and he was quite lanky, I guess, and good at climbing. And so he would literally climb the walls to his school. He was expelled from numerous schools for either cutting class, not showing up, or being disruptive. He started using drugs because he talks about how hard it was for him to focus. He was weirdly into dead animals and animal carcasses, got into falconry at a young age, which like is awesome. Not the dead carcass thing that has led to problems in his life, but falconry, that's cool. You know, like if that's your hyper focus and you get into conservation because you spend a lot of time in the woods because you're neurodivergent and being in nature gives you a lot of dopamine, cool. Some people won't be into falconry because it's training your animal to hunt other animals, but like, I don't know. I'm somebody who likes nature and animals, and falcons are awesome. Like, they're so cool. I would get into falconry and name my first falcon Millennium because I'm a Star Wars nerd. So no, like he was super disruptive, didn't stick to school, and like just didn't have a lot of consequences. The family just sort of like paid for him to hush hush be expelled and go to a different school. He talks about using heroin as like the first time his brain would get quiet. Like, yeah, man, you're just neurodivergent. Um, so he's a very odd person. The Kennedy family sent a family member off to the institution to be lobotomized without her consent. And then when that went horribly wrong, as expected, they shipped her off to an institution and never talked about her again. So traumatic deaths in his childhood, a weird fascination with death. Because of that, he and his siblings would joke about another dead Kennedy and used to pull pranks on people about like they got hit by their car and killed another Kennedy. Then when they miraculously recover, just make jokes about it. So like kind of macabre humor coming from that. He's super into like again animal carcasses and stuff. He used to hang out by this field of like cow carcasses, and like everyone was like, "This is weird and smells terrible. Why are you here?" And he's like, "My falcon can catch a lot of rats, so that's cool." And then started doing a ton of drugs. And then he's got a family member who gets institutionalized and never spoken of again. So this shroud of secrecy that we see across socioeconomic status for families with somebody who is institutionalized. There's a lot of shame around that. I had a great grandma who was institutionalized, and I'm a mental health professional, and I've never gotten the full story as to why. No one seems to know. She's married to a pastor, and I work with religious trauma now, so I have some thoughts on that. I only knew her when she was deep in dementia and kind of a not nice person to be around. But again, like I can relate and say like, hey, yeah, like I've had some lived experience around what happens with secrecy when someone's institutionalized. I grew up with an aunt who's been in prison my whole life who I've never met, that like again just like didn't get talked about in the family. So like to see him be the head of HHS, which is a job he's not qualified for, but to see him spout off about like his take on mental health and wellness being totally skewed, it's like all you really have to do is look at the first 18 years of his life to be like, oh shit, like of course this person doesn't understand mental health and has some really janky ideas of what it looks like and how to actually support people. He's been taught that like everyone dies, the best way to handle your shit is self-medicating, and that we don't talk about people with mental health issues. It's embarrassing. That's not someone you want to put in charge of HHS. But it doesn't stop there for RFK, of course, and I am going to besmirch his personal name left and right here because he's killed a ton of people already, and it's just going to get worse. A ton is maybe a lot, like at least 83, but probably more. This is frustrating, right? Like for my own sanity here, just going to chime in and say this is not a fun thing to talk about. It would be great if we weren't doing this as a country. So anyway, he at some point goes to law school and somehow gets a degree. I'm gonna guess having someone else take his test. This is pure speculation. Having someone else take his test, and the Kennedy name probably went pretty far here. But he is actually trained as a lawyer and worked a lot in environmental spaces. The problem when you're looking at RFK Jr.'s history is that he has a bunch of personal problems that mingled with his professional life. So he was working to hold corporations accountable for polluting environments. That's admirable, right? Like, I'm on board for that. Yes, we should be able to hold corporations accountable. Menards here in Wisconsin is the largest polluter in the state. This is well known. Like, we should hold them accountable. They should have to pay fines that are large and significant, not capped for what seemed like a reasonably large number in the 1970s. Like, fuck Menards. But like, yeah, going after corporations, great. I can support that. That's good work. He got involved in a bunch of different charity work because, again, the name Kennedy still carries a bunch of weight, even though we haven't had a particularly relevant Kennedy since JFK. Blown away. What else do we have to say? Billy Joel might be to blame here for immortalizing Kennedy for generations to come. JFK. I have to clarify which Kennedy I'm talking about, right? But then RFK has a kid who has allergies with a wife that he doesn't particularly care for. He's pretty awful to women. I'm not even getting into the sexual assaults here. He's sexually assaulted multiple women. His kid gets allergies while he's working on suing corporations that are putting mercury into the water, which is, again, is good. Like, let's stop corporations from doing that and hold them accountable financially and put people in prison. Great, I'm on board. I'm not on board for the prison part. I'm kind of opposed to the prison industrial complex. Let's not let them run corporations anymore and have them do public service. And take away their money and all the money the corporation made from that pollution. Great, I'm on board. Let's have consequences. Accountability would be lovely. So Kennedy's working on these corporations that are polluting everyone with mercury, and he gets it into his head, based on nothing other than personal experience as a lawyer and a Kennedy, that his kids' allergies are because of mercury poisoning. And he comes to the conclusion, again, not based on anything. I cannot reiterate enough that this is not based on anything, just this guy's ideas, that vaccines are the cause of the mercury exposure and that his kid has allergies because of vaccines, the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine. This gets him into the orbit of anti-vaxxers everywhere, namely Andrew Wakefield, who's a quack. Over and over and over again, it's been proven that this guy doctored his test results and then skewed them even further in how he talked about it to show that vaccines are related to autism. And he's lost his medical license. He's disgraced in the scientific community, and the anti-vax community loves him. His one study that linked this is fraudulent. We know this factually. This is not an opinion or an interpretation. His results were faked, and then he skewed it even further to show that because he had an agenda, right? It was bad science and it was a fraudulent study. It has been dismissed. He has been dismissed, and he has then got into a lucrative line of work as the main spokesperson for the anti-vax community. So Bobby Kennedy links up with this guy, and big fan, right? Birds of a feather. Falconry puns. And so, like, this is sort of where shit goes off the rails. Again, like, he was recovered from his heroin addiction at this point in his life, but he's got a marriage that's failing. He's got a wife who he is psychologically tormenting. trying to keep the kids away from her, all this other stuff. She was like a Kennedy fangirl, so like that probably wasn't a great relationship from the beginning. He's cheating on her all over the place. Um, it's just a mess. She ends up killing herself in their divorce proceedings, and what a nightmare. And so like Kennedy throughout this time just sort of like goes off the deep end. He throws the Kennedy name behind the anti-vax movement, which at this point like didn't have a ton going for it. But at this point, Jenny McCarthy gets into the game, and then Oprah amplifies this. So we have a Kennedy and Oprah amplifying the anti-vax community, and yeah, it's horrific. Where I say he's killed 83 people is in like 2018, 2019, Kennedy went to Samoa with his one of his foundations again, that thrived on the Kennedy name, right? And stirred up a great deal of panic about the MMR vaccine, measles, mumps, and rubella. And basically, the country responded by pausing vaccines and said we need more information, which like we don't. The study that Kennedy used was the Wakefield study, which had been debunked time and time again as fraudulent and not factually accurate. And so like we didn't need more information, but they paused this, and then measles ramped up and killed a bunch of kids, most of them young children. And Kennedy claims he didn't do that. He didn't literally go say, don't get your kid vaccinated. He just headlined a media push to say the vaccines aren't safe and will kill your child. He didn't say, don't get vaccinated. But the vaccines aren't safe and will kill your child, ... implies don't get vaccinated. It's not safe. You don't tell a parent that something's going to kill their child and then say, but totally up to you. I'm not going to weigh in here. Like, yes, you're weighing in by saying that. Don't let your kid ride in the front seat without a car seat or they'll die. Yeah, don't let your kid ride in the front seat is what I'm saying. I am telling you not to do that. I'm telling you not to put your kid in a car seat without, or put your kid in a car without a car seat. That's me saying, don't do that. Please be safe. Put your kid in a car seat. Make sure they're facing the correct way and securely put in that car seat correctly. Go to your local fire department to make sure that you're doing it right. Yep, I can advocate for that. So he's definitely was advocating for and was the whole reason why all these kids died. And like he's taken zero accountability for it. He said, well, I didn't tell them not to get vaccinated. In the same way that he didn't tell a bunch of Texans to not get vaccinated. He just said the vaccine's not safe. You shouldn't take it. You should do your own research. Which like he's not qualified to do, right? He's not a researcher. He's not a scientist. He's a lawyer. I don't even know that his license is still relevant or up to date, but that's not even relevant. So he killed a bunch of kids 2018, 2019, didn't take any accountability for it. And then COVID hit, which Kennedy became a top 3 misinformation distributor. Again, like dude just got deep into this and then was connected with it. And then the Kennedy name amplified a bunch of stuff. Basically, they took Wakefield's disgraced study and slapped Kennedy as the spokesperson for it. And so that Wakefield wouldn't keep getting called out everywhere. Kennedy at some point had his like Instagram account delisted or blocked or muted or whatever in that brief period of time where social media was like, ooh, maybe we should take care of policing disinformation on our sites. What a brief, wonderful period of time we had there. And that's what made him get into politics because he'd been silenced from his 800,000 followers or whatever. Dude, your name's Kennedy. You can get on any podcast you want because your name's Kennedy, not been silenced. The whole like preposterous notion that people were getting canceled. It's just a stupid timeline to be living through. Just dumb. You're not being canceled. You went on Rogan to spout out your misinformation. Like you're not being silenced. But anyway, for somebody who'd relatively stayed out of politics his whole life in spite of the Kennedy name, decided to get into politics on an anti-vax platform. So, like, also, Kennedy just killed a bunch of people through COVID by being a top 3 disinformation spreader. One of the other top disinformation spreaders, I always like to go back to this, was just like a house mom from the UK, like not a doctor, not a professional of any kind, just someone perpetually online who shared every bit of disinformation everywhere that she could find. So, like, there you go. A mom from the UK with no medical training, and RFK Jr., no medical training. That's who you're hitching your wagon to, anti-vaxxers. Trump, in his infinite stupidity, thought RFK running for president would take a bunch of votes from Joe Biden because Kennedy equals Democrat, even though Kennedy had been disavowed by Democrats everywhere for his anti-science takes. Even his own family has disowned him. There's so much here. Also, Kennedy cited in like 2012 in the divorce proceedings from the wife who would eventually go on to kill herself, claimed that he had severe brain fog to the point where he couldn't earn as much money as he was making because he had a brain worm. There's reason to question whether or not he has an actual brain worm. His story, first of all, has not stayed consistent with how he learned about the brain worm. But he cited severe brain fog as a reason to limit his earning potential, perhaps just to lower the amount of child support he would have to pay or change the amount of alimony. But like, either way, he's on record in a legal setting saying, I have severe brain fog. It's in 2012. Dude's been on a lot of gear since then. Gear being slang term for steroids. So his brain's not getting better. But yeah, he's going to run for president as a third party spoiler, and Trump's like, that's great because Kennedy's will take away Democrats. And then everyone sort of started panicking because, like, oh no, the anti-vax crowd is also the evangelical Republican wing of Trump's base because they're anti-science. And so, whoops-a-daisies, now Trump and Kennedy decide to team up because Trump says, I'll put you in my cabinet. You're not going to win, and you're taking too many of my votes. Kennedy oddly recorded that. Very obvious quid pro quo, but I don't know, laws and rules don't matter anymore, especially if you're rich. So all of that is to build to Robert F. Kennedy Jr. being the head of Health and Human Services. And that's so dumb. And then he had a measles outbreak because of course. And there's a bunch of cases in Texas and the surrounding area. And we're not even talking about that anymore. Measles was stamped out in America. It didn't exist. We had ended it through high vaccination rates. You dummies who are listening to a professional propagandist who has no science background to his name. And then kids die, and kids die. That's where this lands us. We can joke about brainworms and animal carcasses, putting a dead whale's head on top of your car and making your kids deal with the gross juices that fly out of it as you drive home because you're a weirdo and you put a dead bear carcass in Central Park because you thought it would be funny for people to wonder where it came from. It used to hang out in a dead cow pit for fun. This fucking guy. And kids are dying because people are listening to him for some reason. Where all this leads us now, April 2025, Kennedy gives a press conference where he says, autism is on the rise. It is an epidemic. It is caused by environmental factors that he, savior of the autistic community, because they're a bunch of invalids who can't write poetry, play baseball, or go on dates, and certainly aren't paying taxes, need a savior like him. And announced in September he would have the results for what's causing autism. all of this is inaccurate. None of that's true. Rates of autism are on the rise slightly, from 1 in 36 kids to 1 in 31 kids, based on a study conducted in 16 different communities in the United States. That is research that was done well, but is by no means like a sweeping rise that is causing epidemic levels. We're catching more autism because we are learning how to test for it better. And with things like Medicaid, Medicare, the Affordable Care Act, more people have more resources to work with mental health, to work with healthcare providers and mental health providers who are going to use agreed upon literature for that testing. Our testing has improved. More people are testing for it. The rates are going up slightly. There's still discrepancies between men and women, male and female. It's testing for kids in this study, and discrepancies between marginalized communities and white kids. So like there's still work to be done. And like anyone who works with autism and neurodivergence knows that like, hey, we're working on that stuff. HHS has cut funding to studies like that. So like in one hand, they're going to cite the study and mischaracterize its results and just outright make stuff up. And the other hand, they're going to cut testing to it, or they're going to cut funding to it. So like it's maddening. Autism is caused by genetics. We know this for sure. It isn't something that needs to be studied. People with autism pay taxes. Saying they don't play baseball is like a weird thing, because if you spend any amount of time around neurodivergent folks who are on the spectrum, people with autism love baseball. I'm joking here. There is a subset of the autistic community that loves statistics, and particularly baseball statistics. So I'm being a little tongue in cheek here to highlight that like even when he's saying bullshit, he doesn't even like realize how bad of bullshit it is by picking something. If you wanted to pick one sport that draws a high number of autistic brains, baseball would be the sport, because there's so many stats to like, and it's such a long season, and there's so many games, just a lot of data. Just a lot of data. And if you have a neurodivergent brain who hyperfixates on data, baseball is a great thing. So like he's just a dumbass for so many reasons. Autistic people have relationships. They fall in love. There's a show on Netflix that's regularly in its top 10. It's like Love on the Spectrum. Again, just like ignore the proof of your eyes and just listen to us, famous people with no relevant medical training. Autistic people pay taxes. So yeah, they write poetry, they're artists, they're creatives, they're athletes. There's a couple of MLB players who have openly said that they're on the spectrum, let alone all the people who are on the spectrum and just love the stats of baseball. I'm autistic. I played sports at a D1 college. I'm married. I have children. I pay taxes. I grew up playing baseball too. How about that? I'm a trifecta. I'm not much for writing poetry, although I have a huge albatross tattooed on my back because of my enjoyment of poetry, specifically Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. So yeah, I don't know what he's going on about. He's just wrong about all of it. Everything he said is wrong. Autism is not a disease. You can't catch it. It is genetic. You're born with it. You are autistic your whole life. He also said there's no one his age autistic who has got autism. Like, yeah, because we used to ship them off, or we didn't support them and they died young. That's like saying there's no one from the 70s who has AIDS. Like, right, because they all died because we let them die because Mike Pence was the governor of Indiana and thinking about gay people made him feel uncomfortable in his loins. Gosh, it's such like stupid. It's so stupid. It's just so like wrong. He just doesn't understand how science works. A majority of the research that's already being done is studying where autism comes from, when again, we already know like less than 5% of federal funding is going to study autism across the lifespan. A lot of it is early detection and early support, which is great. We should study those things. But like, again, to say like, oh, there aren't old people with autism, right? Because nobody's been studying it. We're just figuring out a better way to catch it young for people, let alone what it looks like for people when they're in their 70s and 80s. Again, he comes from a family where they institutionalized someone after giving them a lobotomy. Like, bruh, you know why there aren't people in your age range who are autistic. They didn't get diagnosed, or they weren't supported and died young, or we shipped them off to institutions and they died, or they killed themselves because they didn't have any support and they felt weird and uncomfortable with society writ large, who was demonizing them all over the place. Kennedy's a moron is maybe the saving grace of this administration, is they're fascists but idiots. Like Himmler was like also an idiot. So again, to say that the OG Nazis were brilliant strategists is not accurate. So there's a lot of harm that can get done by authoritarian idiots. Kennedy thinks that autism is environmental. It's not. He also thinks that profoundly severe cases of autism, as he refers to them as profound cases, profound autism. This isn't really nomenclature we use anymore, but whatever. Dude's 71 and roided out of his mind. It's got a big old brainworm on steroids in his brain. He thinks that sending neurodivergent folks or people who take stimulant medication, so those of us with ADHD, he thinks that people who are autistic, he thinks that people who are on SSRIs should be sent to wellness farms. Now, in the fascist authoritarian regime, it makes sense to panic that that means concentration camps. Sending people to Sikot in El Salvador is the modern concentration camp. Auschwitz, not in Germany, it's in Poland. That's meaningful because the Nazis didn't create concentration camps in their own country. They sent undesirables to other countries, and they didn't start killing them right away. That came later. So Kennedy's rhetoric is incredibly dangerous and scary given the fascist regime that is in charge. And also, I think he's just dim-witted enough to think that like this is actually helpful. He thinks a hard day's work will like help them. But you know, the concern is that Stephen Miller would be in charge of making these decisions, and it would be putting kids and neurodivergent folks to work to make up for the migrant labor that we're deporting left and right, even though we're not holding the businesses and corporations that take advantage of migrant work or people, undocumented immigrants, rather than hold the corporations accountable, just going to roll back child labor protections. And again, so like I think Kennedy thinks, yes, this is what would help people. I did much better on heroin is his life story, but you know, he's sober now, so he's going to leave that part out and say time in nature does wonders for people. From like a guy who's never actually had to work hard in his life because his family, again, has a ton of money from shorting the stock market before the crash. The worst people get money. I'm gonna see about marrying Jeff Bezos in the future so that I can divorce him, like his one wife, who's like done more for charity than other rich people, and all her money just comes from divorcing Jeff Bezos. Way to take one for the team and marry Bezos, then divorce him, and then put his money to good. So anyway, I think the danger here is that RFK really wants to set up like wellness camps a la troubled teen industries. If we send them off for a while, they'll do manual labor and feel better. And like for anyone who knows anything about the troubled teen industry, when we have troubled youths who are like often struggling with mental health issues, and we send them out in the desert with a disgraced ex-Marine, some of them die. Some of them commit suicide later in life. Like this is not actually a helpful thing. We don't send people off to work physical labor to cure their mental health. We don't institutionalize them. That doesn't make it better. And we don't try and cure things that are genetic, that don't have cures and don't need to be cured. That's abusive and terrible. So I don't think he wants to genocide all neurodivergent folks like the Nazis actually did. They wanted to do that and then they did it. I think he thinks he's actually helping, and he's just a moron. And so he's going to do a lot more harm, because rather than look at something like evidence and admit that he's wrong, he's just doubled and tripled down at every chance that he's had to move off the anti-vax train. I am deeply concerned that wellness farms would turn into concentration camps. I'm not downplaying that. I think he wants to set it up as voluntary, and then it wouldn't be. And I think he wants to set it up as treatment, and then of course it would turn into abuse. Like, none of these people have ever like read the Stanford prison study, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, I can hold some space that this traumatized dude who's had a very terrible life has made a lot of mistakes and continued to fail up, and now is wants to do something good and is gonna do a ton of harm instead, because he's actually a fucking moron. I do think Trump would be okay sending people off and then murdering them. I think Stephen Miller is giddy at the thought of that, an actual Nazi. So, you know, like, this isn't the administration to do that. And again, like, we have so much, that's such a stupid conversation to have, because that should never happen. It's just that if you were to do that terrible thing that would definitely harm people and lead to their deaths in this administration, they're going to jump on that to get rid of undesirables. So the other thing that Kennedy said, especially with the not paying taxes thing, that was alarming, was then you have, you know, you're creating this idea of undesirables. You have these people who are taking up resources while not contributing at all. And that's what the Nazis used. That's what the Nazis used, again, the OG Nazis in Germany in the 30s, to say that they had these mouths that were taking food and not contributing. And those were some of the first people they sent to the concentration camps and then they killed. So definitely harkening back to the Nazi regime in a scary way, that, like, again, like, when they set up, before CCOT happened with El Salvador and the administration was thinking about sending people to Guantanamo Bay, nothing bad ever happened there, he said very sarcastically. You had somebody get in front of cameras and say, this isn't the camps. And, like, if you need to clarify that, you're probably making a bad decision, right? Like, youth sports programs in your local community aren't clarifying that they're not concentration camps because no one thinks they are. If you think that something is a concentration camp because you're doing bad stuff that makes people think that, maybe we should slow that roll. Anyway, the next thing that happened, I'm not even sure where I'm at in recording time here, but this is a long episode because terrible things keep happening. The next thing that happened is Kennedy, or a spokesperson for him, said, we're going to get the National Institute for Health to start tracking who has autism, who's been diagnosed, who's on medication, blah, 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 blah. And they wouldn't answer any questions about that. They just said, like, we're going to get a registry. And, like, again, when you're part of a fascistic government, an authoritarian regime that is disappearing people without due process, a registry sounds like a bad thing. And so, generally speaking, healthcare information is confidential, and anybody who wants to do research is blocked from getting it, first of all. But if they're able to work through the bureaucratic red tape to get access to health information, it is still confidential. So you can get some data, like, people in this age group show up with this diagnosis this percentage of the time, but you can't get, like, you know, Tommy Baloney from 5th Street has autism. But the way that RFK talked about it was sort of like, we're going to get Tommy Baloney's information and put all that into a registry. And so that's concerning, because you have ICE running around disappearing people without due process. And then you have the history of fascistic governments rounding up undesirables, like in their view, people with autism, and sending them to the camps. So yeah, that rhetoric is really scary, legitimately. NIH, like, again, some of these government positions that like you can just have a new regime come in and like fire a bunch of people and then hire your loyalists. You get those DUI hires in. That's a Pete Hegseth joke. I am obviously a fan of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. The acronym used to be IDEA, which was inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility, which is for people who are physically disabled or have different mental abilities or are veterans. Coding CRT and DEI as your new N-word doesn't hide the racism, gang. So anyway, where was I? Yeah, NIH is now also not like doing its job. So people rightfully were concerned. There was a lot of outrage about this. And as of recording on April 28th, anyway, Kennedy has backed off on this, and the idea of the registry is currently on hold. But like, ooh, it's it's a thing that we can't let go of, and now we have to keep tabs on this because that's a problem. Healthcare information should be confidential. And you have idiots like Doge running around. Again, like the poster people we want for functional humans with neurodivergent brains are not like an undiagnosed RFK and a self-diagnosed Elon Musk. Yikes. So anyway, gonna go off on a tangent about Andrew Tate there, but I'm gonna stop. Protesting matters. Holding protests is helpful. Holding figures loosely accountable or trying to hold them accountable for being awful people matters. This registry that was going to go through has been halted because of the public outcry. Please, please, please keep doing the public outcry. There's some bad autism organizations out there that are just anti-vax groups masquerading. There's some good ones out there too. The Autistic Self-Advocacy Network is one that I tend to find better than a lot of the other ones. They put out a couple statements recently that I will link to because I think they're worthwhile, just to highlight things that we definitively know. Vaccines do not cause autism. Autistic individuals deserve respect and support. And evidence-based policy is essential when dealing with neurodiversity. I don't know. That's like a pretty bare minimum that is just wildly being ignored. The news media is complicit in a lot of this, that just because a celebrity says something doesn't mean we need to act like it's true. Just because a reality TV star says something doesn't mean we need to act like it's true. Just because someone named Kennedy says something doesn't mean it's true. Just because somebody says something on a podcast doesn't mean it's true. And I would hope that people hold that accountability for me and for Joe Rogan the same. Yeah, I don't know. I'm somewhat heartened. I have some hope that, again, I don't think Kennedy himself is a fascist. I do think the government, the Trump 2.0 regime is. So he's part of a fascistic regime, even if he himself isn't a fascist. But that's dangerous. I think even if he's going to harm people through his version of what he thinks is doing is right, it's bad. It's bad in this government, and it's not safe. And he's being disingenuous to think that he's being helpful to people. He knows better because he's killed a bunch of people while trying to help them, supposedly. So he knows better. He's a moron. He's entitled, and he makes money from having this stance. So like, fuck him. And yeah, let's protest and try and hold some accountability here until we can get some functional adults in the room who have relevant expertise. And let's get some people who can advocate for themselves because they were diagnosed properly and have done the work, unlike his undiagnosed self. Oh, I dislike this timeline. Y'all, thanks for tuning in. This was a drab one. I apologize. I was going to have a fellow autistic therapist chime in and rant with me, but we're saving that for later. And this is like, again, I'm a white guy, so I'll put my name out and publicly decry some of this. That is not brave of me. I'm not patting myself on the back. I'm just saying there are people who are a little more rightfully concerned about taking some of these public stances. So if you are somebody who has benefited from privilege, who still holds privilege status, we need to speak out against this stuff. Yeah. Yep. So keep doing that. Like and subscribe and share the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. That's super helpful. If you have ideas for guests you would like me to talk to or topics, also interested in that. I don't like talking about politics. I would love to be a mental health podcast that never, ever, ever has to discuss politics again. It'd be lovely if people who don't have any relevant expertise would stay the fuck away from mental health and stop damaging our mental health. But until that happens, we'll probably have to have some updates on stuff like this. As always, take care of yourself, take care of somebody else. Peace.